There is a special kind of person who remembers rewinding a VHS tape before returning it to Blockbuster LLC, and also remembers the exact week they downloaded their first MP3. Not someone who only knows streaming, not someone who never used a cassette. Someone who lived through both, one after the other, right in the middle of learning who they were. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, psychologists have spent many years unsure how to describe you. And that confusion became very interesting in 2014. Sociologist Sarah Stankorb gave this group a name for the first time: Xennials, a microgeneration born between 1977 and 1985, sitting between Generation X and Millennials. Some researchers also call them the Oregon Trail generation, after the Oregon Trail, the old computer game many of you played at school. Always moving through uncertain paths with limited supplies, figuring out the next step as you went. It is a more accurate description than it sounds. Most generational research uses wide time groups: Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z. Xennials are only about 8 or 9 years wide. That is not a full generation. That is a very exact moment in time. And what happened during that moment left a mark that larger categories simply cannot explain. Not because this group is special in a better way, but because of what happened, and more importantly, when it happened. Think about what life really looked like before the internet existed. You passed notes in class on folded paper that could be taken away. You made plans to meet someone at a certain corner at a certain time, then went there and waited. There was no way to check if they were late. You either showed up or you did not. And people remembered which one you were. If you missed a TV show, it was simply gone. You asked a friend to tell you what happened and spent the rest of the week imagining it. And your mistakes, that argument at a party, that embarrassing thing you said in front of the wrong person, that phase in 9th grade, slowly faded away. Nobody saved it. Nobody took screenshots. It stayed in a few people's memories and slowly became softer. That is how memories work when nothing is there to keep them sharp. The brain is actually made for exactly this: to let things change over time, keep what still matters, let go of what does not. Growing up in a world that allowed that process meant your childhood could become a story, not a permanent file you had to stay inside forever. Then, just as you were entering your late teens and early 20s, the whole world changed. Not slowly, almost overnight. Email, mobile phones, Napster, MySpace, broadband. Within a few years, the world you grew up in almost stopped existing, and a completely different one appeared in its place. Research in neuroscience found that the part of the brain responsible for learning new systems keeps developing until around age 25. You experienced the whole digital revolution during that window, old enough to clearly remember what came before, young enough that your brain was still truly open to what replaced it. Gen X learned the internet the way adults learn a second language: useful, sometimes smooth, but never completely natural. Younger millennials and Gen Z grew up inside it. For them, the internet is not a tool they learned later. It is the world they live in. You are the only group that carries both. You remember what it felt like to leave the house and truly be unreachable for hours. And you also move through 17 different messaging apps without stress. Not because you are unusual, but because the door opened at exactly the right time and then closed. But there is one part of this that almost nobody talks about. You entered the job market around the dot-com crash in the early 2000s. First real jobs, first apartments, first real effort to build a life, and the ground disappeared almost right away. You rebuilt, slowly and carefully, and just when you were reaching your most stable years, 2008 happened. Economists call this a scarring effect. Financial instability early in your career leaves a mark that does not disappear when life gets better, and you can see it in small, quiet choices. The emergency fund never feels big enough. A backup plan is made even when there is no clear reason for one. A small pause before choosing something permanent, even when everything looks fine. That is not anxiety. It is closer to muscle memory. Your body remembers something your mind has already moved beyond. If you have noticed that pattern in yourself and never knew where it came from, now you know. Here is something worth thinking about. Because not all of this is strength. You often become the natural translator in any room, between older co-workers who want order and structure and younger ones who want speed and freedom. Between the generation that feels nervous about new technology and the generation that has never known life without it. That position looks useful, and often it is. But being the person who connects every gap means constantly taking in tension from both sides, making things work, smoothing problems without anyone asking what that costs you. Psychologists call this emotional labor, and people who carry it often stop noticing they are doing it. It stops feeling like effort and starts feeling normal, which makes it easy to miss how much energy it really takes. If you have spent years being the reliable one and felt a tiredness underneath that you could not fully explain, that is not a personality trait. That is the cost of holding things together for a long time without setting them down. So, think again about that VHS tape. The person who rewound it before returning it, and then learned MP3s a few years later, did not do that because they were especially adaptable. They did it because they had no other choice. The world changed, and they changed with it quietly, without losing the version of themselves that existed before. That is quieter than it sounds, and rarer than most people understand. You watched one world end, not with an announcement, not with a clear before and after, just slowly. Then suddenly, the way things change when you are not watching directly. And then you watched another one begin. Old enough to know what was being left behind, young enough to step into what came next without getting stuck in between. Most people get one world. You got the seam. The exact place where one kind of human life was stitched into a completely different one. And you learned, not as a lesson, just by living, that who you are does not have to be decided by the world where you started. At a time when the ground keeps moving for everyone, people who already practiced landing on their feet when it moved, without forgetting where they came from, carry something that cannot really be taught, only lived.